So welcome everyone to our Net Zero webinar today. We're going to be looking at photovoltaic panels and community energy. And it's really nice to have my colleagues from Chichester, Winchester, and Portsmouth Diocese, as well as from Guildford. Steve Collins is our program manager, and he's waving just now. I think I saw Gareth Martin, one of the team down at Chichester. Some aren't available today because of half-term break, but thanks to those who have been able to join the call. And we're joined by a number of presenters, and the first of whom is going to be Lisa from Titan Eco, who are a solar panel design and install company based in Fetcham in Guildford Diocese. I think I don't need to say anything else other than to introduce Lisa to give her presentation first, and then we'll move on to community energy after that. But over to you, Lisa. Welcome.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you for having me today. Just so you have a little bit of background of where this information is coming from, my name's Lisa Kenter. I work at Titan Eco in Fetcham, very close to Leatherhead. I actually came into solar a little later, switched careers after having my son. I have a master's in sustainability, but I had worked for many years in editing. And then found the time to make the switch. So I'm a real true believer of this technology. I don't think that we will be able to move away from petrochemicals and the effects of those until this infrastructure is really adopted. So let's get started. I'm just going to share my screen with you and we'll go through a little presentation I put together, if that's all right. Perfect. So I can maximize this. You can see what you're seeing. All right. So this is just meant to be a short guide. I've tried to make it as accessible as possible, but please, if there's any questions, I think there's a little raise your hand icon. I'm happy to answer them now or later, whatever is preferable. So why would you choose a PV system? Obviously, there are environmental benefits to this. There's the financial benefits. Those you will see more in the long run, to be quite honest. But obviously, we have to remember that these systems today are lasting into 20, 30 years. So even though the numbers are big at the beginning, there is a payback that you will see in the long run. It's a great way to model behavior for the rest of the community. It reduces operating expenses from day one once the installation is put in place. It affords you a measure of energy independence and reduces your exposure to sudden price hikes in the energy market. Sorry, there we go. So the components of a basic PV system, as you'll see here, the sun obviously irradiates the panels. They are made out of various materials, some electron poor and some electron rich, and the energy of the sun moves those electrons from one material to the other, creating a current. Now, the current that you get directly from a PV panel is DC, direct current. It's not what we have in the wall in the socket. So it must go through an inverter. The inverter harmonizes that direct current to an AC current and matches the frequency and the voltage to what's in the grid so that you can run your appliances off of that. Now that energy can go either directly to whatever you're using in the building for usage immediately. It can go out to the grid. If it's not used, it will just dissipate as heat. And if you have a battery system as part of the installation, it can be stored for later use in the battery. Now, there are a few things that you have to consider when thinking about, will this work for us on this building at this site? One of them is, of course, roof space. You need a substantial amount of room uninterrupted, no vents or chimneys, and things like that. You can have smaller installations on what we would call higgledy-piggledy sort of roofs, but generally we do need a substantial amount of size to be able to. Presentation mode, please. Am I not in presentation mode? Oh, I see. It's gone to the other screen. Apologies for that. Let's see if I can switch my screens. One second. I'm going to have to reshare with a different screen. Apologies. I'm trying to manage 3 screens, so it's doing its own thing. Let's see. I think this is better. Can you see, Martin? Can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see the screen
I
with
can see a
the
lovely
church cartoon?
sunset over a city, but I can't see your presentation at the
That's not what
moment.
we want. Okay. How about now?
No, I think I can still see.
No.
There we are.
There we
Considerations might
are.
work for us.
Okay, we've done it. Sorry about that. Technical issues as per. Okay. There we go. So, as I was saying, we need the roof space. We need the orientation is going to be very important. Every degree that the panel is facing away from south will decrease its effectiveness. So ideally, we want to be facing south, east, west. It can also be made to work, but that's one of the main considerations of how powerful the array will actually end up being. Another consideration is, of course, shading. So any significant shading, be it from turrets, chimney stacks, trees, things like that, that's going to really affect how well the system performs. The general way that panels are connected up to each other is in a string. And if you have a string of panels and one is shaded, its potency will be decreased, and it will decrease the potency of everything else in that line. There are ways of getting around that, such as adding optimizers, which in essence separates the string so that one shade doesn't affect another panel. But the ideal is to avoid any shading. So we can always try and think of creative solutions, but these are going to be your main factors when considering how well a system is going to perform. Of course, with buildings such as churches, the aesthetics are going to be really important. And just generally speaking, the more consumption there is, the more usage is required, the more it makes sense to have a system like this. It's going to pay back quicker. You are going to see the financial benefits more obviously. So in a building that's rarely used, probably not worth the investment. In a building that has high usage, it just makes complete sense. Now, the question of battery storage, this is one that's kind of hard for people to understand a lot of the time, and that's to do with lots of things that have nothing to do with battery storage, but more the tariffs and the systems that are in place to kind of offset these costs. So, of course, battery storage is a significant investment. It is one of the bigger ticket items in a PV system, I would say. And so it really needs to be considered carefully. One of the main things would be, when are we using electricity? If it's primarily during the day, maybe you don't need battery storage and you can just use the electricity that is being produced at that moment during the day, and then use the grid electricity for anything left over of usage during the evening. However, if you have significant usage during the evening hours, which here in the UK in winter could start as early as 3:30, so we generally do recommend battery storage. And what that means is that you are producing electricity during the day, you store it during the evening, and then you can use that during the evening hours when there is no more sun to be had. Another factor that comes into it is if you're able to get a time of use electricity tariff. The tariff is important because if you have an off-peak tariff with cheaper electricity during off-peak hours, such as the evening, what you can do is say during the day you're paying 27 pence per kilowatt hour. In the evening, you might be paying as low as 7 pence per kilowatt hour. You can use that 7 pence electricity to charge up the battery during the evening, during the nighttime, and then use that very cheap electricity during the high peak hours and save yourself basically 20 pence per kilowatt hour, which doesn't sound a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it does add up. That's one way that the cost of batteries is offset. And another way is that batteries, when installed alongside a solar PV array, gives you the right to apply for an SEG, which is a smart export guarantee. And the smart export guarantee means that you can sell that energy back to the grid. It won't just flow. I mean, it will just flow naturally back into the grid, but the smart export guarantee means that it will be metered and you can get paid for it. And you can get paid up to, I believe, 15 pence per kilowatt hour. So again, those are two ways that the costs of batteries can be offset by using them correctly in the right situations. Financing a PV system can be difficult. It's not a small investment, but there are several sources that are very helpful. Obviously, the Church of England is putting a lot of attention and funds towards this, and I think that's great. Borough councils, local councils can also be very helpful, either with funds that they provide themselves or just directing you in the right way. Government grants have existed in the past. I'm not sure there are any currently, but they are always coming up and changing, so that's always a good place to check. There's charities, interest groups, and of course your own communities. Kickstarters have raised a lot of funds for these sort of things. It makes a big difference. And we have put together a little guide mostly aimed at places in Surrey, but if anyone wants to use this as a jumping off point, I'm happy for you to have access and request it separately, or just take it from the PDF, which I suppose Martin could share. Another thing to consider when you're looking at quotations is we generally say, and this is an average, but a PV system should have a payback period of about 7 to 8 years. That's very average and mostly based on residential installations, but it's just a number to give you a sort of idea of what it should look like. And when you take that into consideration in conjunction with how long these systems are lasting, you start to understand the economics of it. In the past, they were shorter lifespan units. The technology really was still evolving and not quite there. Now we're seeing panels that are warranted for 25, 30 years, and that's just the warranty. They even come nowadays with a performance guarantee where they basically guarantee that the panel will be producing about 80% of its rating at the 30-year mark. So that gives you an idea of how much the technology has evolved and how long you should be looking that these systems will last for. So we're looking upwards of 30 years, really. Now, batteries and inverters might last a little bit less, but the guarantee is for 10 years, often extendable. It's important to look into that when you have the installation done. But just because the warranties for 10 years doesn't mean that we expect it to fail after 10 years. We're really looking at 15, 20 years with these units, and that's kind of in the unknown because the technology hasn't been around for that long. So, and then when you are getting prices for these systems, you're going to get a variety of prices. Of course, that will correspond with the size of the units, the size of the battery, etc. But even in comparable sizes, you'll see a big difference in price, and that's to do with the quality, the ease of use, and the experience for the monitoring aspect of it. A lot of people want to see how much is being offset, how much is being produced, how effective everything is being, and those really come with the higher ticket manufacturers. The most basic one that we personally offer is the Fox system. It's produced in China. It's very solid. rarely throws up faults, but it's more of a install and forget about it. It's going to do its job at a very basic level. It's going to produce the energy, invert it, and that's kind of it. The monitoring is very basic and not easy to manipulate or adjust to your preferences. When you're looking at the other end of the spectrum, like Tesla, they have complex algorithms and applications. You can see every little detail of what the system is doing at any given time. If there's a fault in a specific panel or where that might be, it takes into account your specific tariff, your specific user usage patterns, your local weather forecasts in real time, and really acts more of as an energy management system that helps you get the most out of the system financially. So that's going to be the biggest price difference that you're going to see between the options. And I would really recommend, whatever you do, never to go for the most basic of manufacturers, because there will be faults and failures, and that will get expensive. Now, for the permissions that you need for a PV system, first off is the DNO, which is the network operator, and usually your installer should do this application on your behalf. Any array over 3.68 kilowatts will need approval, and it will just depend on the infrastructure that exists in your local area in the grid. So the DNO can, depending on those limitations, decide to only allow you to install a certain number of panels or export a certain number of kilowatts, and it's really up to them based on their infrastructure. And we don't know what is going to happen until the application is put forth. They could request a full assessment, and that can take up to 6 weeks. But any reputable, skipped ahead. Any reputable installer should amend your contract and design based on what the DNO returns. In some cases, you will need planning and permission. There are a few very specific cases because it is generally accepted under permitted development. And this link down here, you can see exactly the Class J order that pertains to solar panels. But if you are in a conservation area, a designated wildlife site, monument listed building, that's when you will need planning permission. And there does seem to be something called an ecclesiastical exemption that can apply to PV installations. So I've linked that link here so that you can get a little bit more information in your own time. I would always say start out with getting 1 or 2 or 3 designs and quotations and have an idea of what it could look like, how much it could produce, how much carbon it's offsetting, and take that to your local authority conservation officer, and they'll be able to guide you as to what permissions you're going to need, who to speak to about it, and maybe what issues could come up based on those plans that you're presenting. And of course, there's church leadership permissions, but you all, I'm sure, will know way more about that than me. Another important aspect is the bird proofing. In years past, people used to kind of skip this part, didn't think it was very important, but pigeons seem to be more intelligent than we give them credit for, because they are learning and they have found a really secure nesting area in panels, and they actually do learn this behavior and move from one array to the next as they are protected and put boundaries around. So the general way that we keep this from happening is we install something called solar mesh, which is kind of like chicken wire, and it goes all the way around, and it will protect from the birds or squirrels or anything else getting under there, causing damage, causing lots of noise on roof tiles, and very, very toxic mess, as you can see in this photo. And I've even seen cases where they've eaten through the insulation of cables. So it's really, really important that you do not skip this step. Because we saw a gap in the market, the managing director of our company actually came up with this solution, which is SolarSkirt. It is a premium option, and I just put it out here specifically because not only is it really effective in doing all the things that bird proofing should do, but it has actually helped other churches that we haven't even been involved with or installed on get planning permission, just because it does lend a bit more sleekness to the installation. It melds it into the roof, and that way you don't see all the metalwork underneath. Here is some of our favorite projects. Many of you, Martin, you said you were just here. So this is St. John's in Stoke. It's grade 2 star listed, and I believe in a conservation area. So it was really sensitive in terms of getting the look right and making sure it didn't affect kind of the character of the building. The way that we approached this design was to actually put the panels in the between the pitches. So they're kind of hidden from view from the street specifically and away from the edge as much as possible so that at an angle you still can see very, very little. And again, we use Sola Skirt, which I believe was very instrumental in getting them planning permission for this project. Now, if you were to look at this building normally and it weren't grade 2 listed in a conservation area, I probably wouldn't have put panels here necessarily at the bottom, just because of the shading, but creativity and working with the situation at hand, you have to make some adjustments, but this was a really good solution for this particular building. And here are some more shots. As you can see from that street view, it's very difficult to tell there's anything modern on that building whatsoever. And this is just a nice quote from David Kern, who was the project lead on this installation. We worked with him a lot, and he was very kind in his assertion that the skirt helped get him over the line with the permissions required. This was another great project we did in Ashted at St. George's. This building is a bit more modern, 1882. But as you can see, we didn't do any of the installation to the front of the building, so it really still retains that same character. And we're able to do a very large installation that at this point, I believe they're saving about offsetting about 9.4 tons of carbon from this installation. As you can see, we did it all toward the back, and using Sola Skirt again, it really does kind of meld better with the building, and they are really offsetting an incredible amount of electricity with clean energy. And this is not a church, obviously, but it is one of our favorite projects. We actually got a few awards for this one. It is grade 2 listed and built in the 1970s. This is Bourne Hall from Ewell. It's a community center and event space, and I believe they have a library, museum, cafe in there. And this is an installation that really shows no matter what shape your building is, no matter what the constraints are, a solution can be found. It just takes a little bit of creativity and creative thinking and a little bit of flexibility. Did St. John's Stoke need any roof renovations to tolerate the panels? I don't believe that it did. I don't believe that it did. I think we had a survey done and it was structurally sound. The weight of panels, although significant, is not crazy, and it's actually well below what architects will tell you is the snow load level that a roof needs to be able to hold anyhow. So I believe the calculation is something like 12 kilos per meter squared once installed. But we always would recommend with an older building to have a survey done, make sure that everything's stable and secure before we continue. And yeah, that's everything I have to share for today. Here's my contact details. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them and help you in any way that I can, but I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your presentation, which was clear and concise. If there are any more questions for Lisa, just pop them into the chat and we can take them towards the end of this session. All the slides will be coming around. They'll be on the Portsmouth Diocese Net Zero webinar page, so you'll be able to download them from there. Great. So I'm going to now hand over to Steve Collins, who's going to introduce a slot on community energy.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Can I just check you can hear me? Can you hear me, Martin? Yeah,
Yeah.
good. I'm going to be very brief because I've got something wrong with my chest. It's actually hurting me to talk at the moment. But it's really lovely to have Mike and Richard here. Mike and Richard, I'll let them introduce themselves in just a second. They're from various, they represent various community energy cooperatives and umbrella organizations that we've become aware of working in our area. They've actually done some work on churches as well. So, Mike, first of all, do you want to introduce yourself, and I'll get up the slide presentation if Lisa can stop sharing her screen, and I can get it up while you and Richard are introducing yourselves.
Yes,
Sorry.
certainly, Steve. I'm Mike Smythe. I'm a full-time volunteer on community energy. I'm a retired solicitor, and I'm now doing what I think is far more important than what I did in my previous career. And I chair an organisation called Energy for All, which is a cooperative of community energy organisations, and it provides a comprehensive back office facility to them. So that between through Energy for All, 35 energy co-ops around the country share resources and expertise, which is a very, very cost-effective way of doing things. And I also chair two of the other ones listed there. Wey Valley Solar, which is a community energy organisation based in Surrey, which installs primarily on public buildings, including one church so far, but mainly schools. And the Schools Energy Co-op, which again, despite its name, will work with any public or community building, but primarily schools. That's installed on just over 100 buildings so far, including Salisbury Cathedral. And you'll see a picture of that a bit later, and we'll explain how it works a bit later too.
Great, thank you. Richard.
Yes, hi everybody. My name's Richard Watson. I am the founder of a co-op based in Hastings and East Sussex called Energize Sussex Coast. Its main mission is to tackle fuel poverty and support, people as in their journeys to have low carbon lifestyles and get away from fossil fuels. Formerly, I was a children's book author and a freelance journalist, and over 20 years ago, I became the public affairs officer for the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford, where it was my job to communicate climate science to the wider public. I think that's what really woke me up to the dangers of climate change. Like Steve, who has traveled a lot in tropical countries, I grew up in Southeast Asia, so I kind of witnessed the damage that extreme weather can do, whether it's rainfall, whether it's forest fires, whether it's man-made fires, and sort of saw the vulnerability and the increasing impacts of climate change. I have two granddaughters, and I think like a lot of people in the community energy movement, we're doing this for non-profit reasons simply because we think it's urgent, essential, and needs to be done. So we set up Energize South in 2020, 2019, 2020, we've got about 160 members now, and its purpose was to install solar on community buildings, schools, and businesses. We have installed solar, well, a very small amount of solar, actually 7.5 kilowatts on a church hall in Orr Village in Hastings. That was done in 2020. That has generated how much was it? I think 49,000 kilowatt hours. And it doesn't sound a lot, but over those 5 years, it has saved the church halls just under £10,000, about £9,900. We also installed solar through Wey Valley on a school in St Leonard's. One of the 153 Church of England schools belonging to the Diocese of Chichester, the one in the most deprived area. So it linked very closely with our ambition to tackle fuel poverty. The local vicar blessed the panels when they were installed in 2014. It was a fantastic event for the school. Everybody enjoyed it. And that school has generated over 300,000 kilowatts. It's a 30 kilowatt system. and it has saved the school around £73,000 in that time. So none of the directors of our co-ops are paid. We're volunteers. I get a salary from Energise Sussex Coast, but work voluntarily for Energise South. Any surplus that we make, and Mike will explain how we work, we fund the installation and the maintenance of panels for 25 years. Any surplus we make is put in a community benefit fund, which we either use to tackle fuel poverty, or if the church has uses for any excess or surplus, then we gift it to the local site. The school in St Leonard's was paying originally 2.5 pence per kilowatt hour, which is a very low price. I think that's gone up now over 10 years to something like 4.1 pence. So you can see there's a considerable saving between the sort of 25 to 30 pence market price that most schools will be paying. And the church hall, which was installed after the feed-in tariff expired, is paying 12.5 pence. So that is the model that we use. I think Mike will go on to explain it in more detail. Yes, what is community energy? Co-ops have been around for 200 years. People, get passionate about saving their local shop or their local pub, invest money into the asset, buy it, run it on a non-profit basis, and keep it as an asset for the community, for community benefit. So, in fact, everyone benefits. That we take the same attitude to energy. We think that locally generated energy should be cheaper for local people, should be owned by local people, and should benefit local people. And fortunately, some of the government regulations are changing in the favor of local energy. So there are ways that you can distribute your energy to local residents as well as use it on your own site. And that is making community energy projects more interesting and more economic, even at smaller scales. So yeah, I'll hand over to Mike. He is the expert on this.
Great, thank you, Richard. And so I think you've already started answering the first two questions really well, actually, in terms of what is a community energy cooperative, and just explaining a little bit in terms of in layman's terms, really, about how the financial model works for a solar scheme. How does it work, and what's in it for a PCC that might want to work with you?
Yeah. Shall I do that one, Steve? And then if you let's move on to the next slide.
Yep.
Okay. It's a bit fiddly there, but broadly, organisations like Energise South and Wey Valley Solar, community energy organisations, they raise money from the local public. It's not a gift. It is repaid over time, and interest is paid on it at a fairly modest rate, but typically sort of 4 to 5%, that sort of level. And the investors are people who want to do something positive with their savings, such as in this case, making a direct impact on climate change. So we as community energy organisations raise the money from the public, and then invest that, spend it in installing solar panels on the host buildings, such as a church or church hall. And that means that the community energy organisation organises the contractor and pays the contractor, dealing with some of the sort of other questions which have cropped up from Lisa. The design is done in conjunction with the church, and I'll mention something about designs in the next slide. We get a structural engineer will check the strength of the roof so that they're strong enough to take the panels, not only their weight, but also the impact of wind getting underneath the panels and lifting them. So they're all checked. We install monitoring equipment so that we can tell whether or not the panels are working. And if they break down, the monitoring will show that. And then we organise, and at the community energy group's expense, will pay for any maintenance needed. Any excess electricity which is generated, which isn't used within the church or the church hall, is what we call exported, goes into the grid. And it's not straightforward to sell it, but we then will try to sell that. And at the end of 25 years, the system, fully maintained, is given to the church. And as already been mentioned, any surplus made in the meantime is rebated back to the church or to a community fund, perhaps linked into local fuel poverty. And all of this is paid for by the church, which has received the panels, paying for the electricity which is used by the church and which is generated by the panels. And that price would be, unless there's something unusual, would be at a price which is less than they're currently paying. So there's a financial saving as well as all the environmental benefits. And as previously mentioned as well, there's an educational facility there that demonstrates doing works in the community, and it gives stability on the electricity price. And in part because electricity prices have been very high in the last few years, the groups which I work with, we estimate saved their host sites over £900,000 last year, which with mainly schools, which was really very satisfying indeed, as well as generating a significant amount of renewable energy. So that's the sort of the summary as to how it works. And although the solar systems are reliable, but they do break down. Not always, by any means, but a proportion of them do break down and do need maintenance. And that's a big advantage of having the arrangement with the community energy organisation, because it organises non-stop monitoring to see that they're running smoothly. And if something does go wrong, we'll then go out and fix it. And with a portfolio of these, it means that the cost of this is in effect shared over every organisation. So that side of it works well. I hope that's clear. If we just go on to the next slide, and this is a repeat to some extent of what Lisa was saying.
Oh, sorry, it's not moving on for some reason.
What roofs are suitable?
Sorry, I can't get it to
Move
move on.
on, Steve.
Yeah, I'm trying to. It's not moving for some reason. Here we go. Let's go down the bottom. There we go. Good.
Yeah. And the key point, the first one is not shaded. This means broad, principally trees. It can be other buildings, but it's principally with churches and church halls, it's trees. And if they are shaded, then it significantly reduces the amount of possible generation, and it makes it much harder. Now, the second point is on listing. Ideally not listed. It's just an awful lot more hassle, and quite often not actually successful, if the building is listed or in a conservation area. Churches in particular, their south-facing roof could well be facing the road, which makes it problematic. It's not fatal. We've got several examples, and Lisa gave some others, of where you can work on listed buildings, but it tends to add to cost and delay. The church, the main church nave is usually south-facing, so that's obviously a good place to start. East-west facing roofs also work pretty well, and church halls often face east-west. And when talking about churches and church halls, the church hall is usually the part of the building which is well used. And for our system to work, which is where the solar panels are installed free of charge, but the church pays for the power used, there has to be a fairly significant degree of daytime power use to make the model stack up. And I'll go on to explain in the next slide, actually, a couple of really good working examples where this works very well indeed. The just thing to bear in mind also is that for this to work, the church hall has to be on the same electricity supply as the church. Where the panels are needs to be on the same electricity supply as where the usage is. Occasionally there's 2 meters, one perhaps for the church and another for the church hall, and you can't switch power very easily from a roof linked to 1 meter onto a building which is using the power on another. And the final thing I mentioned is that different materials are easier or harder to work with. So slate roofs in particular are much more expensive and so tend to be a lot less suitable. Metal roofs, which you can often get on church halls or tiles, are absolutely ideal. Gables have a shading effect in much the same way that trees do and make it more expensive to install because the roof is bitty. So you get the hang of it. A nice, open, unshaded, plain roof is ideal, and they're the best ones to work with.
I think, Mike, it goes without saying as well that the roof is in good condition, because you're not wanting to take the panels off during that 25 years period. But actually, if it isn't in good condition and you're going to be doing some work anyway to it, then naturally you can potentially share the scaffolding cost across two projects, which yeah, so it's a whole thing of planning, sort of in unison.
And that's a big saving. So in one of the examples that's in the next slide, the church hall was being re-roofed, and there's 3 examples here. So Woking URC, which is the bottom picture, the panels were installed at the time the church hall was being re-roofed. And that is a big saving. The cost of scaffolding is a big part of the expense. The actual panels themselves are pretty cheap. I would mention that where we do need the support of the church is in obtaining the necessary faculty. That is not something which we're able to do. So we'd look after things like getting the consent from the grid and getting the structural engineers organised and their reports. But when it comes to actually getting the approval to proceed, that's something we ask the church to do. And here's 3 examples. The first one, which is quite similar to one of Lisa's listed ones, but in some ways perhaps even more spectacular, in the panels we've installed on Salisbury Cathedral. And these are actually on the cloisters, but they run into the main, the church is all on one electricity supply. And the power consumption there is very high indeed. So everything that those panels generate is used within the sort of the cathedral complex. And what's particularly helpful there is that there's catering, because catering is a high power user, lighting is a very low power user. Offices don't use that much, but here is a cafe and other facilities within the cloisters. The next example, which is in many ways the most relevant one here, I suspect, is St Paul's in Addlestone. This is these are community energy funded. It's about as small, I think one of the questions there, as we could actually go. These are panels installed on the south-facing nave. The church isn't listed, it's not in a conservation area. The church hall there is really active. So it starts with breakfast clubs, then moves on to, I think it's mothers and toddlers. It then has old people's lunches. It then moves on to exercise classes and so forth. And there's a homework class and tea and refreshments for children in the evening. So the church hall is very fully used. There's quite a bit of catering. And it means that the power from the church panels is all used within the building, which is a very cost-effective way of doing it.
Just to add on this one, we do actually have a case study on this one written up. So when we share the slides, we can circulate that around for people to have a look at in more detail. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in terms of funding, this is within Wey Valley Solar, and Addlestone is just off the Wey Valley. And the money, we had a share issue, and all the money was actually raised from members of the church in this particular case. And we paid them interest at, I think, 4.5%. And some of that they then give back to the church, and the church gets a small profit share each year. It gets its share of the profits which Wey Valley make, which goes back to church uses. And then Woking URC is a bigger example. This is one where the panels were installed at the same time as the re-roofing, which helped. In fact, it was the engineers looking at the roof that told the church that it's in dire need of re-roofing. So there's an added benefit there in a way. And again, it has very similar usage in the church hall to the St Paul's in Addlestone. It's a very, very busy church used every single day with catering. and that is an east-west facing system. The panels themselves don't generate as much as the south-facing system, but in some ways the power is more useful because it starts off generating earlier in the day as the sun rises and continues rather later in the day as the sun sets. So it gives a better profile of generation to match the use in the building. So east-west is fine, and again, not shaded. None of these are shaded. You can see the trees at Addlestone, but they don't actually affect the panels. And I think that was it, Steve. I think that's
it was just really folks are listening and thinking that their church roof or some land that might be suitable. Who to contact? What are the next steps? Well, probably the next steps are there on the screen there to contact you guys, and obviously, as you've already mentioned, sort of faculty arrangements are key. So please do keep your local net zero team and your church buildings team, DAC secretary, informed of what you're thinking, so that we can sort of just walk alongside you in this journey. But yeah, great.
So what we offer is the funding as well as the sort of organisation of the installation. Clearly, if a church has the funds itself, or has given it, or has got a grant, then it doesn't need community energy organisations to do that. But I would recommend in that case that they do organise some monitoring of the systems. And solar is not just install and forget. It's always worth keeping an eye on what's going on, because it's such a waste of time if it's broken, or sometimes, to be honest, it just gets switched off and no one realizes it. So it's the monitoring as well worthwhile.
Great. Thank you so much. Martin, is it okay if I hand back to you for questions?
Thank you very much, Steve, and thank you to Richard and Mike for that helpful presentation. There have been some questions in the chat, which Lisa and Richard have been answering as we've gone along. I wonder, Richard and Mike, whether you have anything more to say about the ethics of manufacture of panels, particularly that come from China.
It's a complicated one. The panels virtually everything has a Chinese aspect to it when you go down the supply chain. The panels which we use are not made in Xinjiang province, and the sort of the provenance is traced so far as one can. But the silicon, which is the main ingredient of a solar panel, the principal mines in the world, I think it's something like 85% of the quarries, are in Xinjiang province. It's not just solar panels, it's anything electronic. And the initial quarrying is done there, and the initial crushing of the minerals and so forth is done there. It then goes into an international market, and it's very difficult for anything to be traced at that stage. There's one quarry, I think, in Norway, but that's fully used. That's booked up for years ahead. So there is a potential issue at that stage, which really applies to anything electronic where silicon is involved. And after that, it's all well traced and there's no use of slave labor, but there are bits of them, or normally all of them, are manufactured in China. And quite often when you say something which isn't manufactured in China, it's made of Chinese components. So it's just the assembly exercise, which is not Chinese. The better quality, shall we say, the better brands do trace it pretty well so far as they can, until it gets back to the underlying raw materials.
Thank you, Mike. A couple of other questions. The minimum kilowatt capacity. I think that question was answered 20, but actually the cooperatives will look at anything if PCCs are very keen. Are batteries used to store energy with cooperative systems? The answer to that one, I think, a resounding yes. There's a question about permissions and list B, which is not usual, but I'm guessing perhaps for an unlisted building, not in a conservation area, may be possible. Did John have anything to say about that? John Wells? No, John's muted, but thanks for your comment, John, that you
It's okay. I'm there now. We've had an extremely interesting 2 years. We originally asked what we thought was a very simple question to put up a 50 kilowatt array on a perfectly good south-facing roof, to be met with a problem from the local authority. They said, your church is not listed, but we consider the building to be a non-designated heritage asset, and therefore it has to comply with the requirements of listing. The long and short of it is that over 2 years and 2 applications, we finally appealed to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State said, yep, no problem, I turn over the refusal. So we're now sitting on a 3-year planning consent to put a 56 kilowatt array on the roof, and it's been a very, very interesting time. Had a lot of help from Steve Collins, also from forget his name now, chap at Inspired Efficiency.
Matt Fulford.
No, not Matt Fulford.
David Legg.
David Legg, that's right.
Yeah.
And David actually taught me a very hard lesson. We were thinking of having an air source heat pump and underfloor heating, and he obviously had an agenda. He said, you really should look more at some infrared heating because your church is not used as fully as it might be, and you might find infrared is going to be a lot more effective. We have, and it is. And as a result of that, the question of whether we go ahead with our planning consent now is very much open. We may not do so, but it has been an extremely interesting ride. One thing I will point out, we deal with Octopus as our green energy supplier, and because we're counted as an industrial or commercial building, the rate of 15 pence, which is much vaunted by Titan and others as a payback, does not apply. The Octopus actually offer us 8 pence on their own deal, and it's not smart export guarantee. Good news is that I've just had smart meters installed on our 3-phase supply in the church. I can start to do some time-phased analysis now and see if things are really going to work out. And we might even be able to divert the energy across the churchyard and use it to heat the church hall. So that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. And
can I just add something else to the experience? It's actually with planners. There's a really good experience in St. Matthew's Worthing, where they thought they were going to have a similar sort of problem to the one that John explained. But they actually got their councillors on side, and rather than actually putting in a planning application and letting, or at least the conservation, rather than letting the conservation officer sort of have delegated authority to turn them down, they actually pushed it through to planning committee, and because they had the councillors on side, the councillors all voted against the advice of their conservation officer. So there's savvy little ways of working it out if you know your councillors and if you know that they will be supportive.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm very well aware of St. Matthew's, had a lot of dealings with them, and we tried exactly the same approach, but our councillors let us down badly.
Yeah.
They failed to do what they should have done.
Thank you all. We are out of time. If there are any further questions, just pass those across to us by email and we will get those answered by the relevant person. Thanks to Lisa, thanks to Mike and Richard, thanks to Steve for hosting us despite your illness. And we really look forward to seeing everyone hopefully at the next in our series of Net Zero webinars, which is on Wednesday, the 26th of November. Ensuring for net zero. Joseph from Ecclesiastical will be looking at some of the additional risks that are posed to churches and church buildings because of climate change, and how the technologies that we're installing, such as solar batteries, etc., are insured in a way which means that they are safe to operate. We'll also be soon publishing some of the first webinars, which will be in 2026. And to keep up to date with everything that's happening in the 4 dioceses, please just go to your diocesan website, look for the Net Zero pages, and sign up to our relevant newsletters. It's good to continue the conversation, to stay in touch. And I think on that note, we will say goodbye for today, and thank you for listening. It's been good to be with you all.